SonicLAB TV.
So here it is. This is the Dave Smith Instruments Mopho keyboard. What this basically is a single voice of the DSI Tetra, which is a 4-voice desktop analog synthesizer, or a keyboard version of the Mopho module. It's monophonic, so you're not going to get polyphony out of it. It's got 2 oscillators, each with a sub-oscillator. It's got an analog filter, low-pass filter, switchable between 2 and 4 pole, with full resonance. Four LFOs, all multi-wave. It's got 3 envelopes, filter, amplitude, and a routable auxiliary envelope that can also be used in repeat mode, which gives you like an additional LFO. It's also got a sequencer and an arpeggiator. So let's take a look at the front panel, the build quality, and the ins and outs on the rear panel. We'll start at the rear. We've got 13 to 15 volt DC input, on-off switch, USB port which gives us MIDI interface into the unit and also allows us access to these MIDI ports, which are in, out, through. This one's switchable by the operating system between out and through. There's also a polychain output. This allows us to hook up additional Dave Smith instruments like the Tetra or other Mophos for more voices, but you use this keyboard to actually control it from this output here, which is quite a clever concept, so you can add additional voices. Sustain pedal input, expression pedal stroke CV. This actually does take a control voltage between 0 and 3.3 volts. Now you can plug in other stuff because it is protected for negative values and higher voltages, so you ain't going to break anything. Right, quick example of how that works. I've got my Dope for Dark Energy. I've taken the patch point out of the LFO, control voltage, and I'm going to plug that into my pedal CV input. Then in global, I'm going to assign that pedal input to low pass filter. Now, when I press the note, it's modulated by the LFO on my Dope. Audio input for processing external audio, left and right stereo outputs, and a headphone output, and that completes the rear panel. Right, so booting up the Mopho, you can see we've got a 32 character LCD, 2 rows of 16, some nice and bright orange stroke yellow LEDs, which give you plenty of indication of the status of your various buttons and knobs. Incidentally, the 2.5 octave keyboard, which has got a nice positive synthy feel, transmits aftertouch as well as velocity, so that's a cool feature. There are 4 separate aftertouch curves if you need to tweak it to your taste. The knobs on the DSI Mopho are a combination of fixed treble standard pots and rotary encoders. Rotary encoders generally assigned to things which have a much wider parameter range, frequency, BPM, source and destination amounts. Now, even with the 25 knobs and 18 buttons, you're going to get a certain amount of doubling up. There's only one envelope control. You choose which one you're controlling by pressing this button. A 4th press means that you control all of them at the same time, so you can easily set up the same envelope for all of them. Same with oscillators, 1 or 2, or both at the same time. The only thing that I found a bit operationally weird with this is you have to press this key here to go into program mode. And you can either change with either this or the parameter knob, change banks with the second parameter knob. Problem is, as soon as you touch any of these pots here or any of the controls, the display defaults to parameter mode. So then if you wanted to quickly change program, you have to go back here, press that again, and you're off again. Not a major niggle, but just a little bit sort of clumsy sometimes if you want to flip through patches and tweak very quickly. What we have here is a pretty fully featured analog synthesizer. Now, I'm not going to be able to go through every single feature that this has to offer, but let me just show you a few of the synthesis highlights. Right, so let's just take a listen to 2 oscillators, both tuned the same. I'll bring in the sub-octave of oscillator 1, which is 1 octave below. Then I'm going to bring in the sub-octave of the second oscillator, which is 2 octaves below. So that's sounding quite big. Now, if I want to increase the size of that, I'll just have to turn this down. I can introduce this thing called feedback, which what this does is actually introduces a gain loop into the system, so you can really drive the various stages. So listen to how, as I introduce that, really starts to break up. Now, I've got the filter here, just in 2-pole mode, very lots of distortion there, and that's without any other resonance or any other stuff going on. Okay, I'm a big fan of pulse width modulation. I'm just going to set one up quickly here. I've just got a single oscillator, routed LFO1 to oscillator 1 pulse width. Using LFO1, I can change the speed there. I like the sound of that, got a bit of filtering on there going on, but I want it to be even bigger, so I've got another oscillator here, which I've routed to pulse width 2, so using the second LFO, which has a different speed. So now if I blend them together, I've got a really massive sound. That's just 2 oscillators, 2 LFOs, and a bit of pulse width modulation. We had quite a lot of questions in after the unboxing video about how easy it is actually to program and use the Mopho keyboard from the front panel. All of the parameters are accessible via the front panel. There's an additional shift button. Pressing the shift button gives you access to these grayed out parameters, and also there's a miscellaneous parameters section for accessing these, and also the global parameters are accessible by pressing a global button. There is also a 16-step 4-channel sequencer on the Mopho. Each of the 4 channels can be routed to a variety of different destinations. Right, activating the sequencer, just switch the sequencer button on, and I switch this button here to edit the sequences, and then I've got 4 sequences which I select with this button. First sequence, I'm going to route to the oscillator frequencies. Then I've got all the individual steps I can edit with this button. I'm using step 9 as a reset, so that I've only got an 8-beat sequence. Each step is then, you can dial in any pitch value you like. Sequence 2, I'm going to route to, let's have a look, low pass filter. And again, I then dial in the values I wish. Now, if I'm honest, although it is definitely possible to program this via the front panel, it's not something I'd prefer to spend my time doing. I'd probably use the editor to do that if I was going to be doing any sequence editing. Although, to be fair, this is probably the only one area where it is a little bit of a faff editing via the front panel. Everything else is pretty much right there. The sequencer and the arpeggiator get their clock from the master BPM. You can subdivide the clock into a number of different divisions for all sorts of rhythmical variations. The arpeggiator type is set in the miscellaneous parameters, and you've got up and down, assign, random, 2 octaves up. A number of different variations there. We also got quite a lot of questions after the unboxing video about how the Mopho keyboard works with MIDI and the editor. The editor communicates via the USB port, which you hook up to your computer, plug it in, gives you a MIDI in and a MIDI out. So here we have it. This is the Mopho sound editor. It looks very familiar to those perhaps who are used to the Tetra or indeed the Mopho. It's exactly the same as the Mopho. Made by same people, Sound Tower. You can get a Pro version which gives you much more patch management options. To be honest, it's not really that necessary. Maybe if you want to quickly set up modulators and controls. Where it's most useful really is in the sequencer, because you can quickly tweak and graphically edit the sequencer steps and assign them to the various destinations quite easily. So those of you who are hoping for a new editor which may be integrated into a VST environment, allows you to control the Mopho from within your DAW, afraid not, this is standalone only. Now, the Mopho transmits quite a lot of different MIDI data. The keyboard transmits velocity as well as pressure. It's not polyphonic aftertouch, unfortunately. All the pots can be set to transmit either most significant byte, least significant byte, mode, or via the global settings, you can send each individual one will send its own fixed assignment control value. So you could use this to control other VSTs if you mapped it all up in your system. So that's quite handy actually. This little chap is really quite a complete synthesizer. It's got a hell of a lot of modulation, a hell of a lot of routing possibilities, pretty good sounding oscillators, not a bad filter, although it would have really been nice to have a multi-mode filter. I guess you can't have everything. The only thing I really have to say against the Mopho is it rather feels like a polyphonic synthesizer trapped inside a monosynth. And that is because a lot of the voices in here, while great in mono, they sort of feel like to be complete, you want to be playing chords. Now, of course, you can do this if you're going to use the polychain mode. Incidentally, polychain, what that allows you to do is hook up, say, a tetra. You dump the patches from the Mopho into the tetra so that they're all exactly the same. Then you can control everything from the Mopho keyboard, including saving patches. But if you were going to do that, the cost of a tetra and the Mopho keyboard would cost you the same amount as a Prophet 08 desktop. So I'm not sure of the economics of that. You'd have to be pretty adamant that that's the way you wanted to go to do this. The Dave Smith Instruments Mopho keyboard is available now, priced at around $879 US and about 540 UK pounds. Now these are full retail prices. Shop around, you're going to get a better deal online or at your local dealer. So if you already own a Dave Smith Tetra, then the Mopho keyboard could be the thing for you, just to give you ideal control of a polyphonic system. Or perhaps if you're in a band, you're the bassist or the guitarist and you want to turn and have a little keyboard that you can play the occasional line or bass line on, again, the Mopho keyboard is just the ticket. Granted, the Mopho keyboard isn't a groundbreaking new synth from Dave Smith, but it's a nicely packaged version of his classic synth engine.